How's it going, everybody? My name's Earl. I decided that I was going to pick up blacksmithing. I decided I'm going to go through a lot of the beginner steps from a beginner's perspective. In this video, I want to go through a couple things like choosing an anvil, choosing your forge setup, picking out your first set of hammers. And I decided, since I was a beginner, you don't get a lot of beginner perspectives most of the time when you're looking. I know a lot of the times when I was going through trying to look up what I should get, things to keep an eye on, where to get steel, there was a lot of people who are already established, a lot of people that already know what they're doing. They already have everything ready to go, and they worked up to that. So I figured we would go through this route. You will see me do things for the first time. When you see somebody who's got 15, 20 years experience doing something going, yeah, this is easy, it's kind of hard to understand that from a beginner's perspective, for me anyway. So I decided, well, first time I do it, maybe people will look and go, hey, this guy can do it, so can I. You know, this guy looks like he's doing it the hard way, I can do it a little bit easier. But I figured this video would be for the basics, some of my personal opinions, things I wish I would have done instead. And I've barely worked with most of my equipment so far, but it is my personal opinion of what I should have done opposed to what I did, and I'll go through all that a little bit farther in the video. Alright, I'm going to begin with anvils. I watched a lot of videos. A lot of people said, get a piece of steel, use that. Beat on that for a little while, decide if you like it, move forward, buy yourself a good anvil. I decided I'm not doing that. If I have the money, I'm going to go buy a new anvil, like whatever I can get. I wish I wouldn't have. One of the saddest things about spending money on something is not knowing how to properly use it and damaging it. One of the first things I did was set it on some cinder blocks, went to use it. It was moving around. That was fine. I figured, I know what I'll do. I'll go get a log and I'll set it up. And a lot of people don't know how to mount them. I've seen so many videos. I know better. Good ideas, poorly executed. I don't know if you can see this right here. This is a truck U-bolt. I figured I would drill a couple holes a little bit smaller and I'd just pound those right in, and it'd hold this anvil down really well. It does. This one does. This one, I got scared because I was pounding it in and I smacked my anvil. And now I got a big chunk missing out of part of my anvil. Also have some dents and stuff in the face of the horn, which I'm not sure if that's my error or the fact that it's a new anvil, but it's not an expensive anvil. This was just under $300, brand new 75-pound Farrier's anvil. I like this anvil, it works well. One of the things I would recommend is do what the professionals say. Get that little piece of steel, that 10, 15-pound round block, whatever you can get. And just practice with the hammer for a little while, because you spend a big chunk of money on an anvil, and one of the first things you do is take a big chunk out of it. It's very upsetting. I know I wasn't too happy when I did it. That's why this one didn't get pounded the rest of the way. I just added some more supports. But I really wish I would have bought something cheaper first to practice on. This did not do it for me when it came to the I think I know better. But if you get a good deal on a used anvil, or it's super cheap and it's a really nice anvil, I would say go for it. If you're have to have something new, which is the way I do a lot of things, this would not be the way I would go again. I would probably buy a piece of steel and I would try to use that first, because damaging one of these, it's a real bummer. It broke my heart for a second when I smacked it with a hammer and that piece was all dented. And I'll bring you in a little bit and show you what I mean. See that little nick right there? Smacked it with a hammer trying to drive this stupid U-bolt in. And then just from inexperience, or maybe it's because the anvil was too soft. Maybe they didn't harden it right, but every time I've tried to just kind of do a little bend over this or anything like that, it just seems to take part of the anvil with it. I'm not sure if it's just because I'm inexperienced or maybe it's the anvil's fault. But since I'm seeing this, I would say it's my fault more than likely. So this is my forge. I run coal. A lot of people say you can't run certain kinds of coal or run this, run that. One of the biggest things I would do is do something I didn't and just kind of look around. Go to your local farm stores, stuff like that, see if they have multiple different kinds of coal. I run anthracite, which a lot of people say you shouldn't run. You can't run it. It's not the right stuff to run. I've been running it. It gets super hot. I actually got to do some modifications to this, which I might do in a video. It seems to work fine for me. I don't know a lot about forges. I don't know a lot of that stuff. I know a lot of people run propane. I bought a propane torch kit to do my own forge, but I got fire brick. I double insulated it with fire brick. I bought drill bits, drilled the holes, everything, had everything what looked like the way everybody else was doing it. And by the time the forge got hot, I had to run 21 psi, and it was freezing up my propane cylinder. It was a 20-pounder. If I'd have had a 100-pounder, I probably would have had no problems. It probably got hot, and I wouldn't have a coal forge. But a little bit of high school metal shop, and I got to play with a coal forge. Made a hook, like a couple little tiny things, like 15 years ago. I really like the idea of the old way of doing it, minus the bellows. I'm not a big fan of the bellows. I prefer to, hand crank or turn a switch. But I'll give you guys a closer view of this here in a minute. But I pretty much did black pipe, cut a hole in the black pipe, laid it in the bottom. The back side is where the fan hooks up. Then I lined some refractory cement, some fire bricks, and did the entire inside. This part is leftover from the air tank that I used for my forge. My wheels are still on there. I keep thinking about getting rid of them, but I keep getting told that it gives it character, so I haven't decided whether I'm getting rid of that. If I do, maybe I'll do it later on, but it was nice keeping this around because now I can drop it down when I'm shutting the forge down. Kind of chokes it out a little bit, but a lot of picking your own forge is looking at what is available to you. I know I got a long drive for the coal I would prefer to use. I did order a couple bags of it, and it cost so much money. So I figured since I was a beginner and I needed something cheap and easy to use, my local store has anthracite, so I can use that. And eventually I'll be able to, after this lockdown thing's over, I might be able to go get a truckload of the stuff I want. But I'll bring you guys in closer so you can get a little bit closer look at this. Yep, so here's a little close-up of my forge. I don't know if you can see it really well, but got a little grate in here, so the airflow, it'll be easier for me to break away all that clinker in the bottom, which you can see some of this stuff is still kind of hooked on there. But it's fairly deep. I probably get about 4.5 to 5 inches is that opening right there. So I get a lot of airflow. I've accidentally melted and burned so much steel in this, just, setting it in there and playing on my phone, or, not really paying attention, which is another thing I would recommend is if you're starting this, I would pay a little bit closer attention than I did. I wasted like probably 1/4 of a coil spring, and all I was doing is straightening it out and just beating on it just to get used to a hammer. So, but yep, all I gotta do, drop that down, and it'll choke that fire out a little bit. And then I do have just a little bit of air back here. I was gonna make this into a stack for ventilation, but everything I've read, it's like, oh, you need about 1 foot opening for proper ventilation. So this thing's just going to be an outside forge until I get a little bit better with everything and I can afford to get a nicer forge. Or I'll just keep using this one for a long time. It seems to do enough of the job. It just needs little tweaks here and there. So that's going to bring me to hammers. The last thing I wanted to kind of talk about. You can get a blacksmithing's rounding hammer. You can buy those. People make them all the time. But they're $100, $200, depending on who's making it, if they're well known, if you can trust it. Most of the time I can see them for about $100, $115, at least on Etsy, on the Facebook Marketplace, stuff like that. I decided that I was going to buy a cheap set, something just to get me started. But you can always use just an old ball peen. It works just fine. I actually got 2 other ball peens that were brand new in the kit I bought. Got a cross peen, sledge, ball peen, ball peen. It's a 3-pound sledge, 3-pound cross peen. I believe these were 2.5, and then this one's a lot smaller. I haven't really used this one for anything except for making this bench, stuff like that, little odds and ends. But I couldn't see spending $115 on one hammer, and then, when I could eventually learn how to make my own. So I decided, I'm going to go to Amazon. I'm just going to buy a cheap set of hammers. This one is the one I've used the most, practicing with, and the handle's loose. So it's not going to last me very long. But I do plan on learning to make my own, and that's what I plan on getting into. Watched a lot of other videos where they took one of these old ball peens, they forged this section out and made it into a hammer eye punch. Essentially flatten this, taper this out, and you use this on the hammer, and you drive the eye hole into the hammerhead, and you make your own hammer blank. So I do have some steel for that. This is going to be the first project I actually make on my channel, so that'll be really interesting to see how well I do with that. But in my opinion, I wouldn't go ahead and spend $100, $115 on one hammer that, like the Anvil, you miss and gouge the front face of the hammer, or you miss and take a chunk out, or you break the handle on your brand new hammer, and now you got to make your own handle or buy another handle. It's just one of those. This was a lot cheaper for multiple, and if I ding this hammer, I'm not going to feel bad about it. And then I can always make it into the same thing I'm going to do with this, make it into a hammer eye punch. So it really works out buying stuff like this. If you end up not using it for very long, or you're just getting started and you take a chunk out of it or whatever and you eventually make your own, the steel is still here. You can use this for other things. So it definitely helps out a lot with that, knowing that it's not a waste. It's not a waste to buy the expensive hammer, but at least with this, you can learn the skill to make the hammer. Whereas if you're just getting started and you damage that really expensive hammer, you might not know how to fix it because you might not have went far enough along. And then you'll be going buying a cheap hammer and trying to use that to figure out what you're going to do about your other hammer. So it just kind of throws you all around. But this would be my recommendation. Just buy a nice cheap set. I wouldn't just go and buy, one of these from Harbor Freight for like $8 or whatever. Just buy a cheap set, start with that. And that way you don't have to feel bad about damaging them. And then move on to bigger and better things. That's some of my opinions on some of the things I really wish I had done, like the anvil, man. That was a big bummer, smacking that with a hammer, just trying to get it ready for me to use. So that was a really big bummer. Other than that, a lot of it's preference. If you wanted to spend the money on the hammers, spend the money on the hammers. If you want to buy a professional forge, you don't want to build your own, that's totally up to you. A lot of people on YouTube, all the forums and stuff like that, just, get started for cheap. Yeah, if you have the money, I guess spend it on what you don't feel comfortable with. If you don't feel comfortable messing with propane for propane forge, you don't want to make your own torches and stuff like that, that's perfectly fine. I ended up getting scared and ordered a set of torches, but they didn't work the way I was hoping. That's why I went to coal. Coal's coal. It burns. You just got to make sure you have enough air. And you can scavenge parts like off of old furnaces. Furnace blowers was what I started with mine. I ended up upgrading, which I'll do that in a later video and kind of talk about that. Like when I fire up the forge, talk about how I fire it up, what blower I used, didn't use, what I upgraded, stuff like that. Just to try to make it a little bit easier for people to start than it was for me. I had money saved up and I blew it in spots that I really wish I wouldn't have. Like, the anvil's awesome, but, and it'll work for me in the long run, but it just bummed me out, damaging it like that. Hammers was an easy one to not spend a lot of money on, because next video I post is going to be turning this ball peen hammer into a hammer eye punch. Hopefully. I'm hoping. We'll see. I am a little bit hesitant, but that's part of the reason I wanted to start doing YouTube. I can share those failures with everybody. Show people maybe it's a little bit easier than you thought it was, but I don't know. It'll be fun either way. Plus, if I tell people, hey, I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. So after saying I'm going to make this into a hammer eye punch, I better make sure I do it. But thanks for watching. Appreciate it. If you learned anything, let me know. If you think I'm dumb, let me know. That works too. If you're highly experienced in watching beginner videos, let me know maybe how you started. If you have a YouTube channel, let me know. I can check it out. All I do when I'm in the house, watch YouTube on blacksmithing for the last month and a half. Just kind of seeing how other people did it. So, but let me know if I helped get you started. Let me know if anything I said helped you out. If you're more experienced, let me know especially on this. If you can let me know how not to mess this up, That'd be nice because I have this, and then I just have some round bar from leftover truck parts, which I'll go over that in another video. But yeah, really hope this one works. Thanks a lot.